A lot to get to with my next guest. Happy to have him on this morning. Federal Immigration Minister Marc Miller is on the line. Minister, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me on, David.
So let's start with a non-immigration topic. You are the Member of Parliament for Ville-Marie-le-Sud-Ouest, Île-des-Sœurs. Victoria Square is in your riding. Your reaction to the events this morning?
Well, look, David, I think people have seen, first and foremost, the devastation that's going on in Gaza. People in Quebec and across Canada are expressing their right to protest, but that is a right that has limits. When it comes to dismantling these encampments, whether it's at McGill or Victoria Square, those are decisions that are taken properly by the SPVM. But, I think what we've seen is that enough was enough, and you can protest all you want. There are limits to that, including the importance not to trespass. But these decisions do remain within the discretion of the police. I'm glad that they acted. I think this has gone on long enough. But we also, as politicians, have to be careful with calling on police to do things. We're not a police state. And people have a right to protest. So it's a careful balance, but I think in this particular case, enough is enough.
All right. Let's move on to our main topic of conversation, immigration, especially here in Quebec. A lot is being said about it at all levels. First of all, you gave an in-depth interview to La Presse Plus on Monday, on Canada Day, which was very interesting. And I'll take a quote from it if I can bring it up from obviously the time now my tablet isn't working. So the quote I was going to refer to, and forgive me now because I'm just going to estimate. But you were talking about the fact that immigration and François Legault, the Quebec Premier, and the Legault government definitely are looking to make immigration not only an election issue for the 26th provincial election, but obviously make it a topic in Quebec for the upcoming federal election. And when we look at the polls, when we look at Quebecers' attitudes toward immigration, there's been a shift over the last few years. You've seen it. When I was immigration minister provincially, there was overall support for immigration. Now, no longer. What is your overall feeling about the fact that François Legault and the Quebec government is unrelentingly making immigration a major issue and a negative issue at that?
I think it's unfortunate that it has become a political issue, and I'm not naive enough to think that in a country like Canada, includes Quebec, there aren't politicians that have views that aren't the same as mine on immigration, or yours for that matter, David. But we have built in Canada a careful consensus, a very positive one around immigration. It isn't perfect, but it's one that we're quite proud of, and immigrants are a large, or at least people that have been born abroad are a large proportion of this country. We have aging demographics, but these are challenges that I think we can face in a mature, reasonable way. I'd say being cavalier in how you blame immigrants or attribute whatever's happening, including in Canada or Quebec, with respect to affordability, the housing crisis, immigration, homelessness. I think it's unfair to blame immigrants. At the same time, that volume that we've seen in the last few years has been considerable. And what Canadians, at least what we've seen in detailed polling and we talk to Canadians, is people are positive towards immigration for the most part, but they don't want it done in a disorderly way, in a way that's not thought through. So that's on politicians' shoulders, including provincial ones, to be mature and responsible about it. I have a really good working relationship with my provincial counterpart, Christine Frechette, and I think that's what Canadians and Quebecers expect us to do. It's just really unfortunate coming out of, for example, the CAC's convention, that it's quite clear that this has become a political issue to blame immigrants for things that aren't 100% their responsibility.
But there's definitely something happening. We're seeing it. Look, we're seeing it in the French political sphere. We're seeing it in the U.S. We're seeing Pierre Poilievre using immigration as a wedge issue right here. Even the nationalist press here in Quebec. I mean, in May of 2023, the front page, it was May 6, 2023, front page of the Journal de Montréal, it was titled that, the massive immigration was a trap set by the federal government to drown out the French nation. And so there's this whole narrative being pushed by cabinet ministers in the Legault government, François Legault himself, that immigration is a threat. And I guess my question to you, and yes, we both agree that that is wrong, but at the same time, the question becomes, I feel that the federal government isn't present enough to give the other side of the story, and that asylum seekers, temporary foreign workers, immigration as a whole is being seen as a negative, falsely at that, but there doesn't seem to be a pushback or enough demonstration factually that immigration is actually a positive in Quebec.
Well, David, it's an interesting conundrum, and when you overly politicize it, the first thing that goes out the door are the facts, and the facts in Quebec are pretty particular. There's no question that the importance of French as a common language in Quebec, obviously respecting minority languages, is important, and it's existential to our identity as Quebecers, the ability to live, speak, and thrive in the French language. It's why the Quebec-Canada Accord has existed and done really well for the last 30 years. If you look at the statistics, and in the 90s, that commentary was probably more apt, but these types of sensationalist front-page stories in the Journal de Montréal or elsewhere are ones that completely ignore 30 years of history, where the Quebec government has taken an unprecedented amount of jurisdiction from the federal government, has exercised it wisely, especially to make Quebec and continue to make Quebec more French. The thing that's sort of lost in this is that Quebec controls almost the entirety of its permanent immigration, whether you like it or not, but it has done a good job. And on its temporary numbers, controls well over, indirectly or directly, 50-60% of those. And so that destiny is entirely in the government of Quebec's hands. Moreover, during our government alone, we've transferred $5.2 billion to Quebec over the last 8 years. A good chunk of that is directly for francisation, to help with francization of immigrants. And there may be challenges there, but that's a challenge that lays on the shoulders of the Quebec government, and we're willing to help. I have a federal responsibility, for example, in Francophone communities outside of Quebec that the federal government admittedly hasn't done a great job on doing, and increasing those numbers from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 8%, even more of the federal responsibility, making sure that Quebec's Canada distinct reality of being a bilingual country is respected. And so these are things that are happening. But again, these sort of sensationalistic front-page stories don't tell that story, and it's a very important one. In fact, it's something that Quebec should be quite proud of.
I will continue my conversation with Federal Immigration Minister Marc Miller.
I'm from the business community, so I can understand requests by companies in Quebec. But right now, it's clear that when you talk about healthcare, about education, about housing, about protection of French, an increase of 230,000 in 2 years, it brings important problems.
Quebec Premier François Legault earlier this year in March talking about the immigration problem in Quebec. I'm joined now by Federal Immigration Minister Marc Miller, who's agreed to continue the conversation. Minister Miller, the narrative keeps on going. There are no real facts, but a lot of Quebecers now associate immigration, asylum seekers in particular, with the housing crisis, with the ongoing problems in the healthcare system and the education system. Back when I was immigration minister in Quebec, I had to ask your government for money to cover these costs. There was a deal finally announced by the Prime Minister and the Premier, $750 million. But the question remains out there. And again, you've said ever since you became immigration minister that the system, the way we process asylum seekers is a problem in Canada. IRCC seriously needs a modernization. You've conceded that. So I guess my question is, where are we in processing and helping the provinces deal with the influx of asylum seekers? And what can we do to also rebut this claim that is causing basically all that ills on the provincial side?
Well, I think you said it first, David, is whether it ends up punishing us or not as politicians, we really owe Canadians and Quebecers the facts. And that's what I strive to do every day. It's unfortunate when they get torqued in a particular direction. I don't want to minimize the challenge that frankly, the inflow of asylum seekers has disproportionately affected Quebec by percentage of the population. Everyone knows the challenges in and around Roxham Road and the international airport in Trudeau. That has had an impact on the number of asylum seekers as a proportion of the population. So I don't want to minimize that. But the shortage in teachers in Quebec goes back years and has nothing really to do with immigrants per se. And the housing crisis is something that has been in the making for about 30 years. Now, 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, even 3-4 years ago, interest rates weren't at 5-6%. They were much lower. Again, little of that can be attributed to immigrants. There's no questioning the volume, particularly the jump in the last few years in people that are here temporarily, mostly in the areas of students and postgraduate work permits in Ontario and British Columbia. But in Quebec, there's been significant jumps in the temporary foreign workers in the manufacturing field, in others, for the benefit of the Quebec economy. But those are areas that are controlled by Quebec. So when I say we really owe it to Canadians to talk about the facts, those are the facts. And they are ones that paint a really complex picture about the state of immigration in Canada. We can't deny the volume, but again, we can't attribute it 100% to everything that ails people. I think we can find a way out of it if politicians put their heads together and yes, talk about the modernization of the immigration system, also the inflow. We are facing significant historical highs of people seeking asylum and looking at Canada. There's a reason for that, but not everyone is entitled to come to Canada. When they do and they claim asylum, we need to be able to process these quicker. We are processing as quickly as ever, but the volume is one that is historic in nature. And it's going to require us to look at more significant measures to kind of tamper that down and turn the taps down on that. Perhaps not things that people like, but things that we need to do for the integrity of the system.
It is historic, and it's going to continue increasing. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and there are going to be more asylum seekers coming here. Already, 2024 is going to be a record year, and before 2023 was a record year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the main complaints on the federal side regarding asylum seekers is the length of treating these requests. It could take years with all the appeal processes and the lack of staffing, the lack of expertise, translators, lawyers, commissioners. I mean, that was a complaint back in 2017, 2018, and you acknowledged that there was a main issue. What is being done by the federal government to modernize the way we treat asylum requests to make sure that they don't take years and they're treated in a very efficient way so as not to overly burden not only the federal system, but the province's different jurisdictions?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. Clearly, digitization and modernization of our processes are key, David. That we saw coming out of COVID, there was a lot of things that were being done by hand, and with everyone working at home, it created a huge backlog. We've invested a tremendous amount of money to modernize that with some results. They are still waiting their particular proof points, but they have been tangible in nature. We've asked the Immigration Refugee Board to increase its processing. It's done that. And so those are positives. On the negative side, like you said, the historic flow is one that is undeniable. And it's one that we're going to have to address in a more direct fashion with some measures that we haven't taken in the past, including legislative measures. Unfortunately, in the budget, we put some measures in that were voted down by the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives. Were in a minority. It was funny because it was measures that were themselves introduced by the Conservatives a long time ago, very similar in nature. So there's a bit of partisanship there, but we'll have to introduce some legislation to make sure the Immigration Refugee Board has the tools that it needs to give people the due process they're entitled to and a speedy response. Right now, the backlogs are due to not the increased volume, but rather the increased volume and the inability to process things in a timely fashion. And so that we will have to address in a little clearer fashion so that we don't have backlogs. And if people need to leave, they will be told to leave. And that's just the reality of it.
In terms of the whole narrative, again, I want to come back to François Legault's comments, his cabinet ministers, the Bloc has been saying the same thing. You're seeing the anti-immigrant message working in France. You see it working in the U.S. You see it working in the rest of Canada. And the polling right here in Quebec is some swath of the population is receptive to this language. And François Legault is even thinking about a sectorial referendum on this issue to get more powers. Again, you're basically in an election year, federally speaking. What is it that you plan on doing until the election is called to show that immigration is a net positive for Quebec and not a negative, as the Legault government keeps saying?
It's an interesting irony, David, because some of our public polling shows clearly that Quebecers, on balance, compared to the rest of Canada, have largely positive views towards
Agreed, but the vote is split, right? And so
that's right, and it's not unnuanced in how that breaks. Mm-hmm. And it's one I think we have to deal with in a mature way. Mm-hmm. That starts with responsibility and leadership from politicians to be clear in their objectives. If they have different views than I do, let's debate it and have a reasonable discussion about it, or else we delve into the unreasonable. And I think that's the unfortunate thing. If you make it part of your campaign sloganing, and if you have no desire yourself, particularly when you're in a position of power, to address it, I think Canadians and Quebecers see through that. I have no doubt that, like any other country that is going through an election right now, or will be going through an election in the next year, that immigration will be a significant flashpoint of discussion, and parties will seek to demarcate themselves. I have confidence in Canadians. I think Canadians want to see a good immigration system, but they don't want it done in a haphazard way and in a sloppy way. And I think that's a responsibility that lies on not only the federal government's shoulders, but provincial governments across Canada. That's why we're having coordination meetings throughout the summer to make sure that when it comes to asylum seekers, each province is taking on its responsibility, where Quebec and Ontario has taken on a disproportionate amount in the last little while, and that's not fair.
I cannot let you go, Minister, without asking you about the Prime Minister. You're a close personal friend of his, and for many, many years now. There are now calls within the caucus to have a conversation. That call has been refused by the caucus chair. There's at least one former cabinet minister, Minister McKenna, calling out the leadership of the Prime Minister. Your thoughts on the unpopularity of the Prime Minister going into a federal election?
Well, there's no doubt that Canadians sent a signal in Toronto, St. Paul's. We should have won it, and we put a lot of effort into it, and we lost. There's no denying that. I think, that said, Prime Minister Trudeau is the best person to lead us into an election, toxic one, where you have Pierre Poilievre shouting slogans right, left, and center with no particular plan, and taking the country in a direction that I feel is not the country that I want to see. And we need to have someone that has a strong leadership skills, where people know where he's coming from. We're not that popularity wave that we had in 2015, but Canadians know what they're getting with the Prime Minister. And there's been an acknowledgement that things need to change, both internally and how we present the policy going forward, and giving Canadians a choice in the next year. I think Prime Minister Trudeau is the best person to do that. I've told him that privately. I've said it quite publicly. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that things don't need to change, and change in a way that respects where Canadians see the country going and reflects that. But I think the Liberal Party is the one that is best placed to do that.
All right, Minister Miller, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, and have a great summer.
Thanks, David. You too.
Marc Miller, Federal Immigration Minister.